This watch is worth $10. The last one I wore was worth more than most cars. I traded a real $2 million empire of concrete and steel for a fleeting digital ghost. I wasn't a fool. I was a successful, intelligent man who made one single mistake over and over again. And that mistake is a trap that's being set for you right now as you watch this. This is the story of how I walked right into it. My name is Samuel, and I'm 70 years old. But the story doesn't start here in this quiet room filled with memories. It starts 45 years ago. I was 25 and my hands were never clean. I mean that literally. There was always a layer of grease under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. I was a mechanic, a good one, but I worked for a man who saw me as just another part of the machinery. Every day I'd fix other people's problems, helping them get back on the road to their lives, while I felt like I was stuck in neutral. The dream wasn't to be a billionaire. It was much simpler. I just wanted to be my own boss. I wanted to build something I could see, something I could touch, something real. So I saved. Every single dollar that didn't go to rent or cheap food went into a shoebox under my bed. For 3 years, I watched that box get heavier. I took every extra shift, worked every weekend. When I finally had enough for a small down payment, I went to the bank. I still remember the loan officer, a man named Mr. Abernathy, looking at my grease-stained hands and my earnest, terrified face. He saw the calluses on my palms and, for some reason, he took a chance on me. That loan, combined with my life savings, was just enough to buy a single run-down gas station on the edge of town. It wasn't much to look at. The sign flickered, 2 of the pumps were unreliable, and the paint was peeling like a bad sunburn. But it was mine. The smell of gasoline and stale coffee was the smell of freedom. The first principle of my business was born from a simple observation. I couldn't compete with the big chain stations on price. They could buy fuel by the tanker. I was buying it by the truckload. So I decided I wouldn't sell gasoline. I would sell trust. In a world that was getting faster and more impersonal, I went the other way. I made it my mission to learn the names of my regulars. I knew that Mr. Henderson read the morning paper, so I always had one set aside for him. I knew Mrs. Gable was a widow on a fixed income, so I'd always find a way to give her a small discount, telling her it was a special of the day. I installed the best coffee machine I could afford and made sure it was always fresh. My restrooms weren't just clean, they were immaculate. It sounds small, doesn't it? But people noticed that when they came to my station, they weren't just a transaction. They were a person. The work was brutal. For the first 2 years, I lived and breathed that station. I was the first to arrive at 5 a.m. and the last to leave after midnight. Many nights I was too tired to even drive home, so I'd just sleep on a cot in the small, cluttered office, ready to open up again in a few hours. My life was a cycle of pumping gas, checking oil, stocking shelves and cleaning up spills. But with every car that pulled in, with every customer who left with a smile, I felt like I was building something. I was laying bricks, one customer at a time. All the profit went straight back into the business. A new pump here, a fresh coat of paint there, a small expansion of the convenience store. It was slow, agonizingly slow, but it was real growth. I could stand on my patch of asphalt and see the physical results of my labor, the turning point. The moment that elevated me from a small business owner to something more wasn't luck. It was homework. I had learned the value of knowing my terrain. I started spending my few free hours at the city planning office, looking at public records, zoning maps, and infrastructure proposals. It was dry, boring work, but it was information that was available to anyone who cared to look. And that's where I found it, a proposal for a new highway bypass that was still in the early committee stages. It wasn't public knowledge yet, but the plans were there. I saw exactly where the new main exit was projected to be built. And right on that corner was a patch of forgotten, overgrown land that nobody wanted. It was the biggest gamble of my life. I took out a second loan, leveraging my now profitable station to its absolute limit. I poured every cent of my savings into buying that useless piece of land. My wife thought I was crazy. My accountant told me I was risking everything on a maybe. For 6 months, I held my breath. Every morning, I woke up with a knot of fear in my stomach. Then, one Tuesday, the news broke. The city had approved the new bypass. My useless land was now the most valuable commercial plot in the county. Building the second station there was different. It was bigger, newer, and from the day it opened, it was a gusher. The profits from that one station dwarfed what my first one made. That's when the vision expanded. I repeated the process. I'd find an underperforming station in a good location and buy it. I'd implement my philosophy of service, renovate the property, and turn it into a community hub. Within 5 years, I had a network of 6 stations. My hands weren't stained with grease anymore. I was hiring mechanics, not working as one. That's how the foundation of my little empire was laid, brick by brick, gallon by gallon, conversation by conversation. If you also believe in the power of building something real from the ground up, something you can be proud of, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. Every great journey starts with that first, difficult step. By the time I was 40, my network of stations was valued at $2 million. It was a solid, cash-flowing business. The income was predictable, the model was proven, and my reputation in the community was sterling. I had security. I had built a fortress of brick, mortar, and goodwill that I believed was impenetrable. I would look at my financial statements, and the numbers felt different than just digits on a page. They represented real things: buildings, inventory, loyal employees, and thousands of happy customers. I had created real value in the world, and I was rewarded for it. I felt invincible. I thought I had already won the game. I had no idea the most dangerous part of my journey was just about to begin. Success, I've learned, has a strange and quiet danger. It's not the collapse you have to fear, not at first. It's the plateau. It's the silence that comes after the frantic climb. By the time I turned 45, the climb was over. My 6 gas stations ran like a well-oiled machine, a testament to the systems I had built. I had hired excellent managers, people who shared my ethos of customer service and hard work. My days were no longer filled with the tangible challenges of fixing a broken pump or negotiating with a fuel supplier. Instead, they were filled with reports, balance sheets, and long, quiet afternoons. The fortress I had so painstakingly constructed was now fully staffed, its walls secure, and I, its king, was rattling around inside it, utterly and profoundly bored. My hands were clean now, always. My suits were tailored, my shoes polished to a mirror shine. I had traded the cacophony of the service bay for the hushed reverence of the Oak Valley Country Club. I had joined at my wife's insistence, a way to network with the right people. But these people were a different breed. They hadn't built their wealth with calloused hands. They had conjured it from the ether. They spoke a foreign language, a lexicon of puts, calls, alphas, and betas. They spoke of the market not as an economic engine, but as a great wild beast to be tamed, a game to be won. My success, once the source of my unshakable pride, began to feel provincial, agricultural even. I had built something out of dirt and asphalt, something real. But in their world of abstract wealth, my $2 million enterprise felt slow, cumbersome, and unsophisticated. I remember one afternoon sitting on the clubhouse terrace, sipping a scotch that cost more than a full tank of premium gasoline. A man named Julian, a charismatic fund manager with a predatory smile and a tan that never faded, was holding court. He was describing a recent trade. The fundamentals were irrelevant, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. It was all about the sentiment, the narrative. We rode the volatility, bought the options on a Thursday, sold on a Monday. A 300% return while you guys were mowing your lawns. The other men laughed, a sound of shared, smug understanding. In that moment, I felt a sting of something I hadn't felt since I was a young mechanic. Inadequacy. They weren't just richer than me. They seemed to be operating on a higher intellectual plane. Their fortunes were won with surgical clicks of a mouse, with an understanding of complex forces I couldn't grasp. My empire, in contrast, had been built with sweat and common sense. It was a direct challenge, not to my wealth, but to my intelligence. A subtle poison began to seep into my contentment, the insidious thought that perhaps I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. Perhaps my success was just the result of brute force, not finesse. That thought became an obsession. I needed to prove to them, and more importantly to myself, that I could play their game, that I could win at it. The word Julian had used, options, stuck in my head. It sounded so sophisticated, so full of, well, options. I went home that night and fell down a rabbit hole of financial websites and video tutorials. The language was dense, filled with esoteric jargon about strike prices, expiration dates, and implied volatility. I didn't understand 90% of it, but I understood the central seductive promise, leverage, the ability to control a massive amount of stock for a tiny fraction of the cost, the chance for asymmetrical returns where a small bet could yield a gigantic payout. It was the opposite of everything I had ever done. My business was built on minimizing risk, on predictable returns, on tangible assets. This was a world of pure risk, of explosive potential, of intangible contracts that could vanish into thin air. It terrified me, and it thrilled me. The next week, I quietly opened an online brokerage account. The process was sterile and anticlimactic. A few forms, a transfer of funds. I put in $10,000, an amount I considered play money, though the act itself felt far more significant. For days, I just watched the screen, paralyzed by indecision. The flashing numbers, the green and red arrows, felt like a cryptic language from another dimension. Then I heard Julian's voice in my head again. He had mentioned a tech company, Synthocorp, which was a market darling at the time. They had an earnings report coming up. The whisper number, he had said, was going to be huge. I didn't do any research. I didn't read their financial statements or understand their product. I was operating on a hot tip and a bruised ego. I looked up the options chain for Synthocorp. It was a dizzying grid of numbers. I picked a strike price that was slightly higher than the current stock price, an out-of-the-money call option simply because it was cheap. It felt less like an investment and more like buying a lottery ticket. For about $1,000, I purchased contracts that would give me the right to control thousands of shares. I clicked the buy button and my heart hammered against my ribs. The money was gone from my account, replaced by a single line of cryptic letters and numbers. For the next 2 days, I was a wreck. I couldn't focus on my own business. I was constantly obsessively refreshing the screen on my phone, watching the value of my tiny position fluctuate by a few dollars. The day of the earnings announcement arrived. The report was due after the market closed. That afternoon was one of the longest of my life. I went to one of my stations, trying to reconnect with the real world, the source of my wealth. I watched my employees interact with customers. I smelled the familiar scent of fuel. I saw the steady, predictable flow of commerce. This was real. This was a business I understood. What had I done? Wagering a piece of it on the digital whim of a company I knew nothing about. That evening, I sat in my home office, the glow of the monitor illuminating my pale, anxious face. The news broke. Synthocorp hadn't just beaten expectations. They had shattered them. Their revenue was up, their projections were stellar. My mind raced. The next morning, when the market opened, the stock gapped up. It didn't just rise, it exploded, soaring over 20%. I fumbled to open my brokerage account, my hands shaking. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The single line of code that represented my options contracts was no longer red or white. It was a brilliant, blazing green. The $1,000 I had bet was now worth nearly $6,000. A 500% return in less than a week. I felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it made me dizzy. It was a feeling more powerful than signing the deed on my first gas station, more intoxicating than seeing my first $1 million net worth statement. Those achievements had been the result of years of grinding, relentless effort. This was effortless. It was a secret code I had cracked. In that moment, I felt like a god. I had bent the universe to my will with a single, brilliant decision. I had outsmarted the plodders, the grinders, the men like my former self. I had beaten Julian and his friends at their own game on my very first try. The relief and vindication were overwhelming. As I sit here now, 70 years old, in the quiet of this simple room, I can see that moment with perfect, heart-breaking clarity. That instant of triumph wasn't a victory. It was the most devastating loss of my life. I just didn't know it yet. It wasn't the opening of a door to a new world of wealth. It was the unlocking of a cage that held a monster. That monster was my own ego, now supercharged with the most dangerous substance on earth, easy money. That first win was the sweetest poison I ever tasted. It was the bait, perfectly placed, designed to catch not just a fish, but the fisherman himself. And I didn't just bite. I swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. That first taste of victory was not a catalyst, it was a contagion. It infected my entire being, fundamentally altering my perception of work, value, and myself. The slow, methodical accumulation of wealth I had practiced for 2 decades suddenly seemed laughably archaic, like building a fire by rubbing 2 sticks together when a book of matches lay on the table. The world of my gas stations, once the vibrant center of my universe, became a grayscale backdrop to the technicolor drama unfolding on my trading screen. The steady, reliable chime of the cash register was drowned out by the thrilling, chaotic symphony of the stock market ticker. My routine, once grounded in the physical world, evaporated. I stopped visiting my stations. The morning walkthroughs, the casual chats with my managers, the simple satisfaction of seeing a freshly cleaned forecourt, all of it was replaced by a pre-market ritual of scanning financial news, charting esoteric patterns, and mainlining caffeine. I became a creature of the screen, my world shrinking to the 16 inches of glowing pixels on my desk. I learned the language, not to truly understand it, but to wear it like a costume. I spoke of theta decay and gamma squeezes with a confidence that bordered on belligerence, using the jargon as both a shield and a weapon to keep the uninitiated at bay. I had mistaken fluency for intelligence, just as I had mistaken that first lucky bet for skill. I was no longer an investor. I had become a hunter of volatility. I was addicted to the violent swings, the heart-stopping drops, and the euphoric surges. A stable, predictable business now felt like a prison of boredom. The adrenaline of the options market was the only thing that made me feel alive. I would buy calls on a pharmaceutical company ahead of an FDA announcement, or puts on a retailer I suspected would have a bad quarter. I had wins and I had losses, but the losses never registered with the same emotional weight as the wins. I rationalized them as the cost of doing business, a small price for the education I was receiving. The wins, however small, were confirmation of my genius. This is the gambler's fallacy, a cognitive trap as old as time, and I had built a nest in it. My ego was now so intertwined with my trading account that a losing day felt like a personal insult, and a winning one, a coronation. While I was living in this digital fantasy land, my real-world empire began to show signs of neglect. It started subtly. A customer complaint here, a dip in monthly revenue there. The immaculate restrooms I had once prided myself on were now merely acceptable. The warm, personal service that had been my signature was replaced by a colder corporate efficiency. My managers, once empowered and motivated, were now operating without their leader, and the passion was draining from the business. The soul of my creation, which had always been a reflection of my own dedication, was fading. I was too engrossed in my phantom pursuit to notice, or more accurately, I chose not to. The numbers in my brokerage account were so much larger and moved so much faster than the sales figures from my stations. I was chasing whales, and I couldn't be bothered with the minnows of my original success. The first real alarm bell was sounded by George. George Henderson had been my accountant and financial advisor for 15 years. He was a quiet, meticulous man with a mind like a steel trap and a demeanor as steady as an oak tree. He was the embodiment of my old self, cautious, pragmatic, and allergic to unnecessary risk. He requested a meeting, and I agreed, annoyed at the interruption. He came into my home office, a place he had rarely been, and his eyes scanned the multiple monitors displaying charts and flashing numbers. He didn't look impressed. He looked concerned, like a doctor seeing a troubling symptom. He laid a folder on my desk and opened it. Inside were spreadsheets, the familiar language of my business. The columns and rows painted a clear, undeniable picture. Profits across all 6 locations were down by an average of 15% over the last quarter. Employee turnover was up. Customer satisfaction scores had dipped. "Samuel," he began, his voice calm and even, "I'm worried. The business needs you. Your focus has shifted." I leaned back in my chair, affecting an air of detached amusement. George, the business is fine. It's a mature asset. It runs itself. I'm focusing on a new profit center, a more dynamic one. He slid a second spreadsheet across the desk. It was a summary of the transfers I had been making from my business accounts to my brokerage account. The total was staggering, far more than I had realized. He then pointed to my screen. "What is this exactly?" he asked, his finger hovering over a complex options position I had open. I launched into an enthusiastic, jargon-laden explanation of my strategy, the potential returns, the leverage I was employing. I spoke like a zealot, a fresh convert to a new religion. George listened patiently, his expression unchanging. When I was finished, he took a deep breath. "Samuel," he said, and his tone was different now, sterner. "I've been running the numbers. After your wins and your losses, you are barely breaking even in this game. But you're not factoring in the real cost. You are siphoning the profits, the real predictable hard-earned money from a business you built from nothing, and you're using it to buy lottery tickets." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "These things you're buying," he gestured to the screen, "they have expiration dates. The vast majority of them expire worthless. You are trading tangible assets for digital contracts that are designed to decay to zero. You are exchanging bricks for clicks. It's a fool's errand." The word fool struck me like a physical blow. A hot surge of anger and indignation rose in my chest. Who was he? A simple bean counter to question my vision. He saw only risk. I saw opportunity. He was stuck in the past, a relic of an analog world, while I was conquering the future. "You don't understand, George," I said, my voice dripping with condescension. "This is how wealth is created now. It's about being nimble, about understanding sentiment, about taking calculated risks. You're still thinking in terms of asphalt and inventory. It's a limited mindset." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not just concern in his eyes, but pity. It was infuriating. "The only thing limited here, Sam," he said softly, packing his briefcase, "is the amount of time it will take for this to go horribly wrong." He left my office, and I felt the chill of his words hang in the air. But my ego, my proud and wounded ego, quickly translated that chill into fuel. He didn't believe in me. He thought I was a fool. I would show him. I would show them all. I wouldn't just win. I would win so big that his cautious, spreadsheet-driven world would look like a child's sandcastle next to my financial skyscraper. That confrontation was the tipping point. It was no longer about the money, it was about vindication. I had a string of small losses following our meeting, and George's words echoed in my ears with each one. I became reckless, desperate for that one transformative trade that would silence all my doubters, especially the one inside my own head. I found what I believed was the perfect opportunity. A volatile biotech stock that was awaiting a crucial FDA decision. The online chatter was electric. Gurus and anonymous experts promised the stock would triple overnight on an approval. It was a binary event, a coin flip with a massive payout. I decided this was it. This was my moment. But I needed more capital to make the bet truly legendary. I needed a war chest. My eyes fell upon the framed photograph on my desk. It was the grand opening of my second station, the one built on the plot of land I had so cleverly acquired. It was the cornerstone of my empire, my most profitable location, a symbol of my hard-won success. And in that moment of profound, ego-driven madness, I saw it not as a business, but as a pile of liquidity. I saw it as fuel for my real ambition. I called my banker the next day. "I'd like to take out a substantial loan," I told him, my voice steady and resolute. "I'm leveraging one of my properties for a new investment, a sure thing." My old friend and advisor had pleaded with me not to turn bricks into clicks. But I was about to do something far worse. I was about to mortgage the very soul of my past to place a bet on a phantom future. The $300,000 appeared in my brokerage account as a single, beautiful, luminescent number. It was abstract, clean, and untethered to the physical reality of the asset I had just mortgaged. I hadn't sold anything, I reasoned. I had merely transformed a slow, cumbersome brick-and-mortar asset into what it was always meant to be, pure, unadulterated capital. It was fuel. It was ammunition. It was the physical manifestation of my conviction. In my mind, I was no longer a desperate gambler. I was a visionary financier, a general marshalling his forces for a decisive, glorious battle. The doubt that had gnawed at me after George's visit was silenced, buried under a landslide of fresh liquidity. My chosen battlefield was a company called Neogen Pharmaceuticals. They were the perfect vessel for my ambitions, a small speculative biotech firm whose entire existence hinged on the upcoming FDA approval of a single flagship drug. The stock was a coiled spring of speculation, vibrating with the nervous energy of thousands of traders just like me. This wasn't a place for the faint of heart. It was a high-stakes arena, and I felt I was born to be in it. Buying the stock itself, however, was for amateurs. It was for the timid. The true masters, the ones who reaped the legendary rewards, played in the world of leverage. I spent hours studying the options chain, that cryptic grid of numbers that had once intimidated me, but now felt like my personal playbook. I wasn't interested in the safe, long-dated options. I wanted maximum impact, maximum velocity. I focused on the call options that were out of the money, meaning the stock price had to make a significant upward move for them to have any value at all. And crucially, I chose options with an expiration date just 2 weeks away. This was the financial equivalent of betting on a lightning strike. The options were dirt cheap, which meant I could acquire an immense amount of them. I wasn't just placing a bet, I was assembling an arsenal. For my $300,000, I purchased contracts that gave me theoretical control over millions of dollars worth of Neogen stock. It was a position of such breathtaking leverage that a mere 20% jump in the stock could increase my investment tenfold. A 30% jump could make me a legend. The moment after I executed the trade was one of pure, unadulterated euphoria. I had done it. I had taken a stand. The sheer scale of my position was intoxicating. I had made a move so bold, so decisive, that it felt destined for greatness. I had transcended the world of quarterly earnings reports and customer loyalty programs. This was finance at its most elemental, its most pure. For a day, I walked on air. Then, the second day came. Neogen stock didn't move. It didn't plummet, which was a small relief, but it didn't surge either. It traded sideways, fluctuating by a few pennies in either direction. And that's when I was introduced to the most insidious, soul-crushing force in the world of options: time decay. The Greeks call it theta. I call it the silent thief. It's the force that dictates that every single second your option gets closer to its expiration date, it loses a tiny piece of its value, even if the underlying stock price remains perfectly still. At first, it was barely noticeable. My position, which had been worth $300,000, was now worth $295. A trifle, but the next day, with the stock still stagnant, it was worth $285. The day after, $270. I was watching my capital melt away before my very eyes. It was like holding an iceberg in my hands on a summer day. I wasn't losing because I was wrong about the company's direction. I was losing simply because I was running out of time. It was a form of psychological torture I could never have imagined. The flashing red number on my screen became my personal tormentor, a constant reminder of my ticking clock and my evaporating fortune. Sleep became a luxury. I would wake up in a cold sweat at 3 in the morning, my mind racing, replaying the decision, my stomach churning with a mixture of terror and hope. With 1 week left until expiration, my position had lost nearly half its value. The initial euphoria had curdled into a thick, suffocating panic. The general on the eve of battle was now just a terrified soldier in a foxhole, praying for a miracle. To sell now would mean accepting a catastrophic loss of $150,000. But it was more than the money. To sell would be to admit defeat. It would be to validate George's pitying look, to concede to my wife's worried glances, to accept the quiet, gnawing voice in my own head that was now whispering that I was, in fact, a fool. My ego, the very force that had driven me into this perilous position, now barred the only logical exit. I could not, would not, accept this loss. It was in this crucible of desperation that the truly unthinkable took root. I had already mortgaged my best asset. What if I could get more capital? What if I could buy more of these same options at their new, lower price? It was the siren song of the gambler, averaging down. It wasn't about correcting a mistake, my mind rationalized. It was about lowering my break-even point. It was a strategically sound maneuver to increase my odds. I was no longer thinking clearly. My decision-making was being fueled by a toxic cocktail of fear and pride. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a commercial real estate broker, a shark I knew who specialized in quick off-market deals. The second was to a competitor I had known for years. I told them the same thing. I was liquidating 2 of my locations, effective immediately for a cash offer. The news was met with stunned silence, then poorly concealed glee. They knew I was in trouble. The offers that came back were insultingly low, a fraction of what the businesses were actually worth. A year ago I would have laughed in their faces, but now I didn't have the luxury of time or pride. I needed the cash. I needed it now. The day I signed the sale documents was the day a part of me died. I sat in a sterile conference room, the papers spread before me. I wasn't just selling businesses, I was selling my history. I was selling the memory of the 18-hour days, the pride of the grand openings, the faces of the loyal employees who had worked for me for over a decade. I was taking 20 years of sweat, sacrifice, and tangible value creation, and I was converting it into a fleeting digital sum for one last desperate roll of the dice. As the pen scrawled my signature, I felt a profound sense of betrayal, a betrayal of the young, greasy-handed man who had dreamed of building something real. The money, nearly $500,000 after the lowball offers, was wired directly into my brokerage account. There was no hesitation, no moment of reflection. My finger, moving with an autonomy born of pure desperation, flew across the keyboard. I bought more of the same Neogen call options, the ones that were now just 5 days away from expiring. My entire position was now a monstrous, bloated thing. My cost basis was lower, it was true, but my exposure was now absolute. I had pushed everything to the center of the table. The value of 3 thriving businesses, my family's security, my entire life's work, was now condensed into a single flickering line item on a computer screen, a digital ghost that would either solidify into a mountain of gold or evaporate into nothingness in less than a week. That night, for the first time in days, I felt a strange and hollow calm. The panic was gone, replaced by a surreal serenity. I had made my choice. There were no more moves to make, no more assets to sell. The die was cast. I looked at the total value of my position, a number north of $600,000, all tethered to the fate of a single FDA announcement. I had taken the bricks of my past and the mortar of my present, and I had wagered all of it. I wasn't just betting on a stock anymore, I was betting on who I was, and as I stared into the abyss of the screen, I felt a terrifying thought surface. I was about to find out. We're now at the precipice. We've climbed the mountain of ambition and walked the tightrope of hubris, and we are standing at the edge of the abyss. What follows is the fall. If you are learning something from the anatomy of my failure, I ask you to subscribe now, so you don't miss the final, most important lesson. And before we take that final step, I want you to comment below. In your judgment, what is the greater poison for an investor? The greed for what you don't have, or the ego that won't let you lose what you do? The final days leading up to the FDA announcement were lived in a state of suspended animation. The bleeding from time decay had stopped, as the market priced in the impending binary event. My entire net worth, the culmination of a lifetime of work, sat there, a $600,000 question mark pulsating on my screen. There was an eerie tranquility to it, the kind of stillness one finds in the eye of a hurricane. I had done everything I could do, the chips were down, I had sold my past and mortgaged my present, all for a single bet on the future. There was nothing left to do but wait for the wheel to stop spinning. I didn't sleep for the final 48 hours. I sat in my office, the world outside my window ceasing to exist, my universe contained within the glowing rectangle in front of me. I drank coffee until my hands trembled, my heart thumping a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I watched the financial news channels where analysts and so-called experts offered their conflicting predictions, their words nothing more than meaningless noise against the roaring silence in my own head. Hope and dread were no longer distinct emotions. They had merged into a single sickening state of being, a constant low-grade electrocution of the soul. My wife tried to speak to me, her face a mask of profound concern, but I couldn't register her words. I was already a ghost in my own home. The announcement was scheduled for after the market close on a Thursday. At 4 o'clock, the closing bell rang, and a hush fell over the financial world. My position was locked in, frozen until the next morning. The news could drop at any second. I sat, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the refresh button on the news feed. The minutes stretched into eternity. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was like a drumbeat counting down to an execution. Then at 4:32 p.m., a single line of text appeared. It wasn't a dramatic headline. It was a cold, sterile, anemic news alert from a press wire. It read, "Neogen Pharmaceuticals' lead drug, Viridian, fails to meet primary endpoints in Phase 3 clinical trials. Company to review strategic alternatives." For a long moment, I didn't breathe. The words seemed to float on the screen, refusing to resolve into meaning. It felt like a language I didn't understand. Fails to meet primary endpoints, strategic alternatives. It was corporate jargon for a complete and utter catastrophe. It was a death sentence delivered in the most dispassionate terms imaginable. The blood drained from my face. The room tilted. The frantic symphony of my anxiety was instantly replaced by a deafening, profound silence. There was no denial. There was no bargaining. In that instant, I knew with a certainty more absolute than anything I had ever known in my life that I was ruined. The rest of the evening is a blur. I remember my wife finding me, still sitting in the chair, unresponsive. I remember the feeling of her hand on my shoulder, trying to pull me back from a place I had already gone. But the real horror began the next morning. I was up before the dawn, drawn back to the scene of the crime. I had to see it. I had to witness the final act. At 9:30 a.m. the opening bell rang. It sounded like a death knell. I watched the ticker for Neogen. It did not open. The screen just showed a series of halts, the exchange struggling to find a price where buyers and sellers could meet. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the stock opened. It was not a decline, it was a disembowelment. The stock had closed the previous day at $50 a share. It opened at $4, a 90% drop. It had ceased to exist at its former altitude and had reappeared in the Mariana Trench of the stock market. I pulled up my brokerage account. My eyes scanned for the line item that represented my life's work. The number I saw was so small, so pathetic, it took me a moment to comprehend. My options, my beautiful, leveraged instruments of destiny, were now just digital fossils. Their strike price, the price at which they would have value, was $45. With the stock now trading at $4, that price was a distant, unreachable star. They were functionally, mathematically, and absolutely worthless. The $600,000 had not become a smaller number. It had simply been erased. It was a puff of smoke, a ghost. It had never been real. The tide had gone out with breathtaking speed, revealing the jagged, ugly rocks of my stupidity. The silence in the room was then shattered by the ringing of the telephone. It was my broker. His voice was not unkind, but it was utterly devoid of sympathy. It was the voice of a professional who was simply doing his job. "Samuel," he said, the word margin hanging in the air before he even said it. The destruction of my options was only the first wave. I had traded on margin, borrowed money from the brokerage itself to amplify my bets. The collateral for those loans was now gone. The brokerage was liquidating every other stock, every bond, every mutual fund in my account to cover the debt. It wasn't enough. "There will be a remaining balance due," he concluded, as if discussing the weather. The second call came an hour later. It was the bank manager, the same man who had approved the loan against my flagship gas station. His tone was one of practiced regret. He had seen the news. He was calling to inform me that, given the catastrophic change in my financial situation, they were calling the loan. The full amount was due immediately. I had no way to pay it. The business, my first great victory, the symbol of my ascent, was gone. It now belonged to the bank. The days that followed were a parade of shame. The letters began to arrive, first from the lawyers representing the men who had bought my other two stations, claiming misrepresentation during the hasty sale. Then came the notices from the bank that had financed my home, the beautiful house that was supposed to be the symbol of my family's security. Bankruptcy was not a choice. It was an inevitability, a formal surrender in a war that had already been lost. I remember standing in the driveway, watching a man I had never met before get into my car and drive it away. I remember signing a stack of papers so thick it felt like the biography of my own failure, each signature a confession. We lost the house, we lost the savings, we lost the country club membership. The friends I had been so desperate to impress simply vanished as if they had never existed. We lost everything that money could buy. The lowest point came about a month later. I was walking aimlessly through the streets of the town I had once felt I owned. My feet, moving with a will of their own, led me back to where it all began. I stood across the street from my first gas station. It was still there, the building I had poured my own sweat into, the asphalt I had personally patched. But it was different. A new sign was being erected. The familiar, friendly logo I had designed myself was gone. In its place was a sterile corporate brand, Apex Fuel. They had plastered it right over the faded outline of my own. I stood there, a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life, and watched them erase the last physical evidence that I had ever succeeded at all. The man who had built that place was gone, and in his place stood a stranger I did not recognize on a street that no longer felt like home. The immediate aftermath of a total financial collapse is not a dramatic, cinematic event. It's a slow, grinding, humiliating process. It's the quiet shame of having your credit card declined for a gallon of milk. It's the averted gazes of people you've known your entire life, people who don't know what to say to the man who flew too close to the sun and now stands before them with melted wings. It's the profound emptiness of a house stripped of its finery, the echoes in the rooms a constant reminder of the life that once filled them. Bankruptcy is a legal term, but the reality is an emotional and spiritual stripping away of everything you thought defined you. For months, I was a shell. I had built my identity on the scaffolding of my success, and when the structure was demolished, I discovered there was terrifyingly little left underneath. We moved into a small rented apartment on the other side of town, in a neighborhood I had only ever driven through on my way to somewhere more important. The furniture was secondhand, the walls were thin, and the view from the window was of a brick wall. The contrast was a daily, silent sermon on the consequences of my hubris. In the beginning, I was consumed by a toxic brew of anger and self-pity. I blamed the market manipulators, the faceless gurus who had filled my head with promises, the predatory nature of the financial system itself. It was a comforting lie, a narrative that cast me as the victim, a noble warrior felled by a treacherous and unseen enemy. It allowed me to exist without having to look at the real culprit, the man staring back at me from the bathroom mirror each morning, his face a roadmap of regret. The person who refused to let me stay lost in that fog was my wife, Eleanor. She had every right to leave me, to despise me for having gambled away the security she had helped me build. But she did not. She had weathered my obsession. She had endured my arrogance, and now, in the smoldering ruins of our life, she became my anchor. She never once said, "I told you so." Instead, she did something far more profound. She treated me not as a failure, but as a man who was grieving. She found a simple job working at the local library, and her small, steady income was what kept us afloat. It was the most humbling and the most loving act I had ever witnessed. That modest paycheck, earned with quiet dignity, had more honor in it than all the phantom millions I had chased on a screen. The turning point for me was a chance encounter. About a year after the collapse, I ran into George Henderson, my old accountant, at the grocery store. I tried to duck down an aisle to avoid the inevitable awkward confrontation, but he saw me. He walked over, his expression not of pity, but of simple human recognition. I braced myself for the lecture I so richly deserved. Instead, he just looked at me and asked, "How are you holding up, Sam?" The simple, honest question broke something open inside me. I mumbled something about being okay, but my voice cracked. The dam of denial I had so carefully constructed crumbled. Standing there between the canned vegetables and the breakfast cereals, I finally confessed. "I was a fool, George," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "For you were right about everything." He just nodded, a deep sadness in his eyes. "The lesson came at a high price, my friend," he said. The question is, what will you do with it? That question became my new obsession. What do you do after you've lost everything? You start to notice what remains, and what remained was surprising. I had lost my fortune, but I had rediscovered my wife. I had lost my status, but I was beginning to find a sliver of my own character again. I had lost all my fair-weather friends, but in their absence I found a profound and cleansing solitude. Stripped of the distractions of wealth, I began, for the first time in decades, to actually see the world around me. I noticed the changing of the seasons, the taste of a simple home-cooked meal, the profound peace of a walk in the park. It was as if I had been living my life in a soundproof room, and someone had finally opened a window. I needed to work, not just for the money, which was a desperate necessity, but for my sanity. I needed to feel useful again. But what could a 50-something disgraced former millionaire do? My name was mud in the local business community. No one would trust me with their finances. The only thing I truly knew, the only skill that was undeniably mine, was the one I had started with. I put an ad in the local paper. Experienced mechanic. Honest work, fair prices. My first job was fixing the brakes on an old pickup truck for $20 an hour. As I knelt on the cold concrete of a stranger's garage, my hands once again becoming intimately familiar with the grime and heft of steel, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. There was an honesty to this work. A problem was presented, and I solved it with my hands and my knowledge. The result was tangible. The truck would stop safely. The customer would be happy. Value was created right there in that moment. There was no leverage, no speculation, no theta decay. There was only effort and result. And as I wiped the grease from my hands at the end of the day, I looked at the dark stains under my fingernails, not with shame, but with a feeling that bordered on reverence. I felt like I had come home. That's the ultimate lesson I learned, the one that cost me $2 million and a decade of my life. I had made the fundamental, catastrophic mistake of confusing the creation of value with the speculation on it. My gas stations were a value creation engine. We provided a clean, safe place for people to buy a product they needed, and we offered a level of service that made their day a little bit better. We were a small but important part of the community's ecosystem. In return for creating that tangible value, we received a fair and predictable profit. It was a simple, honest, and honorable equation. The options market, the world that had so seduced me, was the opposite. For the most part, it's a zero-sum game. It's a vast global arena where speculators bet on the direction of assets that other people like the young, ambitious Sam, are actually building. I wasn't creating anything. I was just a parasite, placing bets on the Herculean efforts of others, convinced my ability to guess was a form of genius. I had traded the noble, difficult work of a builder for the hollow, arrogant thrill of a gambler. I learned that money is a byproduct, not the goal. It's the shadow cast by a valuable object. I had made the mistake of chasing the shadow, and in doing so, I had lost the substance entirely. Today, at 70, my life is small and it is good. I have a modest but busy mobile mechanic business. My clients trust me. My hands are permanently stained with grease again, and I have never been more proud of them. Eleanor and I live comfortably, but not extravagantly. Our wealth is not measured in our bank account, but in the strength of our 45-year marriage, in the respect of our community, and in the quiet peace of a life lived without the gnawing hunger for more. I lost a fortune, but I found my soul. I traded a kingdom of asphalt for a small patch of solid ground, and it has proven to be a foundation far more stable. If my story has resonated with you, I ask you to share it with someone who might be chasing a shadow of their own. And please, in the comments, share the greatest lesson that life or money has ever taught you. Thank you for listening.